Hello and welcome to another Hot Topic election special. I'm Hugh Riches. This time, two candidates for the Gainsborough constituency are able to join me. They are John Saxon for UKIP and Leslie Rollings for the Liberal Democrats. Thank you both very much for coming in. You're both standing for one of the safest Tory seats in the country. Sir Edward Lee holds it by one of the biggest majorities they have. What hope have you got? Leslie, you first.
I think it's all, people now are looking and wanting somebody local, I think, to represent them rather than remote politicians that perhaps only visit the constituency occasionally. People are looking closely at what's going on, and in the constituency where we are, we're looking at what has and hasn't happened over the last 26 years. Have we been left behind? Has infrastructure fallen behind? Have we had the support that really we could have had from an MP?
But if you were in that case, you'd advocate that anybody who happens to be local, whatever their politics are, should be the person who should be standing or should be elected.
Well, I think it helps if you actually live in the area, understand the needs of the people and the industry and the businesses, and if you're working locally as well.
This sort of chimes with the UKIP mentality, doesn't it, John? Local democracy for local people.
Absolutely, yes. I think we have a good chance in Gainsborough, although it is a large Tory majority. I think we do have a good chance there. Once people start to understand the issues, we have to remember that 32% of the people in Gainsborough did not vote at the last election, and that would be my message, is to vote.
For whatever party. It's better that they vote than that they...
I would prefer the vote at UKIP, but I'd prefer that they vote, especially the young people. I think there are very few young people who are actually actively voting in elections at the moment. And I'll be quite honest and say that they're going to be here 70 years after I've gone. It's their future they should be voting for.
That's going to make them at least 88.
They say most people are going to live till about 100.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I'm not sure that the government can quite affect that change this immediately. You're talking of the changing voting patterns and new parties like UKIP coming in for the first time. You're an interesting case in point, John, because I believe most of your life you've been a Labour voter.
Yes, that's right. Most of my life I've been a Labour voter.
In your constituency in Gainsborough, who do you hope to be taking the votes from most? The Tories, the Labour, or perhaps the Liberal Democrats?
I don't think it's a matter of who do we think we're going to take the vote off most. I think we're going to take it across the board, quite honestly. I think we'll take a certain percentage of Conservative voters. I think we'll certainly take a lot of the Liberal Democrat voters. And Labour, they have a very tiny proportion of the voters in Gainsborough, but I think we might take a few of those as well. What
do you think, Leslie? Is UKIP is it a universal threat to all other parties?
I don't think that's not my experience really. I fought a county council election just over about a year and a half ago, and they weren't the messages that I was hearing on the doorstep really. And in that election, people want to see their politicians working for them locally. They want to see them talking to them, being there, helping them with local issues. They want them to be accessible, and that's what they want above everything else, I think. So I don't really see UKIP being a major threat to anything that goes on in the constituency this year.
The local issues that come up in the East Midlands generally, around the Humber, but especially perhaps in Gainsborough, are issues like, for instance, the wind farms. And wind farms are something that are subject to a national policy, a policy made by the Authority of Parliament. What's your view of wind farms, John?
My view of wind farms is they're completely pointless. They are maybe legislated by an Act of Parliament, but they're actually based on an EU directive. At this moment in time, I haven't seen any evidence that wind farms can be a viable source of alternative energy. Very few power stations, if any, have closed down as a direct result of them. What happens is we have to keep the power stations running at half power, lest the wind should fail. Running at half power, the coal-fired and gas-fired power stations actually produce as much carbon emissions as they do at full power. But they're
burning less fuel.
They're burning less fuel,
of the finite fuel,
emissions, which is what we're trying to offset. In my experience, wind farms are there to offset carbon emissions. They're for a person in Brussels to tick a little box to say, we've offset these carbon emissions. Carbon emissions can also be offset in the UK by building hydroelectric plants in India.
Leslie?
Yes, wind farms, obviously, one of the problems I think in Lincolnshire is that applications are popping up all over the place, hugely expensive for the councils to deal with. there's not a lot of evidence that comes out beforehand to support putting them in the places they do, and they are a real blot on the landscape. Lincolnshire has big skies, beautiful landscapes, and these things really don't fit in. When you travel over, say, to northern Spain, and there are hundreds of wind farms in the mountains where it's really sort of windy, there's not a sense. There's a wind farm application. There's several, around in the constituency at the moment. But you sort of come out of your house each day thinking, well, is it really very windy? And you drive past these turbines, and quite often they're still. So you think, is this more about perhaps certain individuals making a lot of money from subsidies, and then it is actually really making a great contribution to our...
So no Green candidate is present, so I'll be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. The arguments against them from both of you that there's a possibility of corruption behind their construction, and that they're horrible because they're ticking off a piece of European bureaucracy.
We've got to look for ways of creating renewable energy, really. I was very interested in some of the tidal power projects that have been going on in Wales. The tide goes in and the tide goes out. I appreciate it's really expensive to put these systems in place, but they are proven. And I think we should, from now start to invest in this, although it's expensive, have a gradual project of increasing.
Surely
projects like that.
Other forms of green energy, would you be more in favour of them, tidal power, for instance?
Absolutely. I think UKIP is in favour of exploring green energy. Tidal power, as Leslie's just said, they have a plan to put tidal power into the estuary south of Wales, now, into the Avon estuary. Now, that would power the whole of South Wales and Cornwall and Devon. Why isn't it being done?
Well, I mean, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in his budget the other day did announce spending on tidal power down there in the Severn Estuary. I suppose, do you want to take any credit for that as a Liberal, as your party being in the coalition?
Well, I think we've been working hard. I mean, one of the things we've worked very successfully in coalition, I think, to try and bring these projects forward and make improvements.
We must discuss Europe with a UKIP candidate here. The Liberal Party is very much in favour of remaining within the European Union. The UKIP is defined by its desire to come out of it. What's wrong with Europe? Isn't it making us all much richer than we would be without it?
No. Is the simple answer. What's wrong with Europe? There are several things wrong with our membership in Europe. I think the problem is that we were sold 40 years ago on entering a European market. I do believe that a number of people may have thought it was going to be cheap beer and cigarettes, and we would be able to buy and sell things to Europe.
It wasn't just beer and cigarettes, was it? It was movement of goods and services without taxation barriers in between them. It's not just a matter of what you can pick up in duty-free.
No, I agree.
It's a larger economy.
Yes, it is. However, what has happened is that bureaucratically, Europe have continued now to try and control Europe. Even Gorbachev said, we've broken up the USSR, and Europe are now trying to make the United States of Europe. Europe has issued 3,600 directives in the last 10 years, an average of 2 a day. The directive on, for instance, selling cabbages into the European Union runs to 38,000 words. This is ridiculous. The whole system is becoming bureaucratic. We are forced to spend £11.2 billion per year in foreign aid which is going to places like India, who are building their 5th aircraft carrier and sending up rockets into space.
Are we forced to do that by Europe?
Yes,
foreign aid.
It's part of our agreement within Europe.
Leslie, are cabbages really that fascinating?
Well, I go to quite a few business breakfasts, working with the business community, particularly around the Gainsborough area. We've got European headquarters of Ping, which is an American company, chosen to site their European headquarters in Gainsborough. And there's quite a lot of manufacturing industry around the town now who are working both in Europe and globally. And I don't hear any of them thinking that life would be better for them if we were to move out of Europe. In fact, that it's the opposite. And I think this discussion needs to centre really around, and I hope the media as well actually really analyse what these big businesses are saying, because they will know what the real impact is, and my perception of it is that it will be jobs if we come out of Europe.
But there is, I mean, Europe is still just absurdly bureaucratic, isn't it? I mean,
Well, of course,
you can get all these examples.
Absolutely, there are all sorts of things, and when you take them out of context, they appear ridiculous, don't they? And that has to change. We can't have people just doing what they like, coming here, going. We need much tighter legislation on all sorts of things, don't we? And
so that you mean you're talking about immigration there?
Well, I'm talking about people coming to work and all the problems that come from that free movement of people that travel around to work, that was there to help people moving around Europe for work, and some of the problems that are attached to that. We obviously need to sort of tighten up on those things and make sure that no one can take advantage of our situation, our system here.
Well, we'll come back to that in a few seconds. Talk about the economics of European trade and of migration, because the two issues are very much melded together, aren't they? But we'll come back to that in a second. I'm afraid we're going to have to stop now for a break, but please come back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still with John Saxon, UKIP candidate, and Leslie Rollings, Liberal Democrat candidate, both candidates for Gainsborough. We were talking about Europe, and we were just moving on to migration there. John, is it not the case that the real appeal of UKIP is not so much a relationship between an international trade zone or where the bureaucracy lies, it's just an appeal to people who dislike migration into this country?
No, I would hope not. I would hope it's an appeal to people who want to have self-governance. I mean, immigration is not a problem in this country. That's the first thing I need to say. Uncontrolled immigration is a problem in this country. What we should be looking at is a points-based system, rather like Australia, rather like the USA, rather like New Zealand. Over 100 other countries in the world have a points-based immigration system where they bring in the people that are needed in the country. If having uncontrolled immigration is not good for the UK. I noticed that the net immigration figures were 298,000, which is a complete disaster. It's strange that the Conservative government have announced that they're going to have to build 250,000 houses per year over the next few years. Do those two figures correlate? It's also relevant, the fact that the net migration figures are obtained from a gross migration of 600 plus thousand people and a net emigration of 300,000.
Well, isn't it rather a compliment that people want to come here? People wouldn't want to come here if there weren't jobs, if there wasn't an economy that's more attractive from their origins. That if at the point where there isn't any work, where there isn't any purpose for them coming here, market forces just stop them coming in the first place.
I think it's very complimentary that they want to come here, and I think that if I was, for instance, living in Bulgaria and was a lot younger, and I heard that there's a place like England where I go across and get a job and work there and send money home to my family and get free medical treatment, then I would be on my way. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The problem that we've got is that it's the British people who are paying for the National Health Service. It's the British people.
Anybody who's coming here to work is also paying taxes, presumably, and is also then paying for the National Health Service, unless you're suggesting that Bulgarians and Romanians are all skiving their taxes.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is that you can't have this uncontrolled immigration coming into the country. It reduces the wages of people who are living in the country at the moment. This is why we have a massive problem. I don't think that the NHS, for instance, has a crisis at this moment in time because of the British people who are living here.
Leslie?
I think, to keep it simple, I think we can't have uncontrolled immigration at the level that we had it. We need to know who's coming here. We need to know who's going out. They need to be coming here because they bring skills and the sort of skills that we need to develop our industries here. That's the bottom line.
Your party, the Liberal Democrats, are in coalition with the Conservatives, who 5 years ago, at the beginning of the coalition, promised to reduce immigration to 100,000 people. And you've massively failed to do that, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I think all we can do really is try and restrict those. The Liberal Democrats have said that we need to have exit controls, so that we need to know who's going out, we need to know who's coming here, and people need to be coming here because they've got skills to work here.
May I just say,
yes,
under the rules of the EU, within the EU, we are not allowed to restrict free movement. Angela Merkel has made it very clear that she will not renegotiate that. So it doesn't matter how many times David Cameron or the Lib Dems or Labour say they are going to renegotiate our terms of EU membership, it will not happen. Angela Merkel has said so.
Well, in some senses, is that rather like saying that if you, people use the club metaphor. If you're a member of the club, then you obey the rules of that club. Now, if you don't like one of those rules, you can lobby to have it changed. But is it not a little bit bordering on petulance just to say, right, if we don't change the rules to the way we want it, we're going to walk out. Give me back my ball. We're not playing.
Oh, no, we're not interested in changing the rules in UKIP. We're interested in leaving the EU. It would give us the funding to be able to do the things that are necessary to do. If I were a member of a golf club that consumed my whole life to the point at which I couldn't feed my family, I have a choice. I either leave the golf club or I starve my family. At this moment in time, what's happening in this country is we're starving the family. The armed forces are losing people, police are losing people, austerity's gone mad. And yet the amount of money we pay in foreign aid and for membership of our club would sort most of those problems out.
Well, that leads us nicely onto the economy. You have, Leslie, the Liberal Democrats of Danny Alexander, as the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, is probably our most senior Liberal Democrat in the economic sphere. You failed to cut the debt and the deficit as much as you promised to 5 years ago.
Well, I think we've done a brilliant job in working with the Conservatives. 5 years ago, no one would have said we could have been successful. We talked earlier a bit about whether there would be another election in a very short space of time. And we've done a very good job. The whole world has gone through a very really difficult economic time. And we are one of the countries that has come out of that best. So I don't think you can look at figures, you can look at data, and you can look at statistics. And I've looked at a lot of that over the last few months preparing for this. And yes, we've still got some way to go. But Liberal Democrats believe that it should be a compromise between making cuts where we can make cuts, but also investing where we can invest to create new jobs and create better infrastructure.
If it's been such a success for the economy, this coalition, and this coalition was forged precisely as an emergency measure, as it were, to save an economy, if it's been such a success, why are the Tories and the Liberals not standing together as a coalition party? Why are you standing against the Tories?
It's clear, isn't it? I mean, they've got their certain policies that they would not shift on, just as Liberal Democrats have too, just as UKIP have. I mean, I think, in Germany and other European countries, they're used to coalition government. And on the doorstep, I'm finding a lot of people actually quite like it. A lot of people think that the Tories are better off with the Liberal Democrats there, actually making sure that their policies don't become too extreme.
People like coalition, specifically the form of government for which nobody votes. You're finding people.
Well, I think I think people quite accept it. I don't think you do meet people on the doorstep that are very much one party, but the vast majority of people aren't. Some people are Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem or UKIP, but the vast majority want things to be run well and want to be able to have access to people locally that they're going to help them and things like that, and see their MP actually helping to develop their local area and working to improve things in their local area.
John, it's not always quite clear what the UKIP economic policy is.
I think it was made very clear yesterday. I think we save 9 billion in foreign aid by reducing foreign aid 2 billion. We save approximately 10 billion by moving out of the EU. We would save 15 billion by scrapping HS2. I think HS2 is completely pointless when we need that money in other areas. We would then invest 2% of GDP in the armed services, with 7 billion being put into new equipment for the armed services. We'd invest 3 billion plus reforms within middle management into the NHS, which would help solve a lot of the problems of the NHS. The intention is to introduce a 35% tax rate. The intention is also to increase the tax.
35% tax rate as an extra band in between the current 20% and 40%.
Yes, between 15 and 25,000, I believe
Right.
it is. And then we would increase the personal allowances to minimum 13,000, but I think they might be looking at 13,500.
Now, one of those things that you want to spend on, you have various ways of saving money there, and we can all make our own calculations, but is spending on the armed forces.
Yes.
How is that important? Why is that useful?
Right,
Forgive me, just to explain why I ask, it's because you want to cut foreign aid, which is a soft form of operating foreign policy. Now, if you don't want to have a foreign policy, as it were, where we affect other countries, why would we need such an expensive defence organisation?
It's not an expensive defence organisation in effect. However, what UKIP have said, and what I believe in, is we will stay out of foreign wars that do not concern us. That's the first step. I believe the reason we need a strong armed forces is because politicians don't seem, in my opinion, to be able to recognise the consequences of their actions.
Foreign wars that don't affect us. Every man's death affects me, for I'm involved with mankind, therefore send not for whom the bell tolls.
Absolutely. I mean, there's never been a time more than now when we've looked at the Ebola crisis. What would have happened if we'd have actually turned around and said, that's your problem? We know what would have happened. We'd have absolutely, the whole thing would have been out of control if people hadn't massively invested into helping those countries sort that problem out. It is ours. If you look at the problems of ISIS, it is our problem. We cannot sort these problems out or actually make a stand without working with other countries and without supporting them.
Well, sorry, just John, let you come back on it. There are these problems which are foreign wars that are our business. ISIS.
Ebola isn't a foreign war, and we did send troops over there to help.
Well, it's foreign.
No,
foreign
we're
aid.
saying
That's
yes.
what you're talking about. It's foreign aid. It's sending money to help vaccinate children against malaria. It's putting water into places. That's what foreign aid is. It's not supporting foreign wars. It's
no, how much do we spend on foreign aid?
Well, the Liberal Democrats have proposed that we'll spend 2% of our GDP
we spend 11.2 billion.
What you're saying, you cut all that out. You're not doing all those things.
Hang on.
You're not,
Please, let me speak.
Very briefly.
We have said we will reduce the foreign aid by 9 billion, and the 2.2 billion that is left will be used for famine and crisis payments, not for building aircraft carriers, not for paying foreign aid to Russia, not for paying foreign aid to Argentina.
Well, you're pulling things out of that
no,
the
I'm
bag,
not pulling things out of the bag.
None of us have any of that information to know whether that's true or not. It sounds,
I'm afraid we're out of time at that point, just as it was getting violent as well. Thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Please join me again for the next Hot Topic election special. Until then, goodbye.
Thank you.